Hello everyone who study physiology with us, and today we come back to the central nervous system and we have the term reticular formation, all about reticular formation of the brain, and as usual we have some video files to this video. We already know the function of the brain stem and of the structure of the brain stem. We know all parts of this midbrain and hindbrain, but we need to pay more attention to one structure or formation. It is called the reticular formation. It is parts of brain stem and even more parts of the brain which look like the net from the part of the neurons, and this part a complex of network of brainstem nuclei and neurons that serves as a major integration and relay centers for many vital brain systems to coordinate functions which necessary for survival. And this is a microphoto of a network-like formation of neurons in the medulla oblongata, and also they are located in the structures of the brain stem. Their influence extends even to the cortex, and the history is usually part of the brain which has the name reticular formation, was introduced at the end of the 19th century by the autodaters. Do you remember the center in a brain daters nuclei? And the term the net means the reticular structure which is similar to the reticular formation, and at the end of the 14th in a previous century, some scientists, we see this photo, were the first study the neural components that regulate the sleep and wakefulness mechanism of the brain, and these physiologists have hypotheses that some structure deep in the brain controls the vital function and has mental insomnia and alertness. And in the end of this practice we will discuss about this function of reticular formation. And now just we need to know the structure of some neurons of the reticular formation. The structure of neurons as the reticular formation is almost the same as the usual neurons, but these neurons highly branched, and neurons are very sensitive to the chemical influence, very, and neurons are polysensitive. So there's a lot of different signals can move to this neuron. It is pain signals, it is from the muscle, spindle signals, and a lot of attention we need to move in a cortex. So next slide about anatomy. Formed by neurons and processes left over after well-defined named nuclei and pathways. And it is very old system, not new like a cortex of the brain, purely different, located in the brain stem and compressed of medullatory, pontine and midbrain reticular formation, and always polysynaptic, and has both ascending and descending components. And now let's sum up the anatomy and move on the function of the reticular formation. The reticular formation consists of more than 100 small nuclear networks and with varying varied function, including the following: the somatic motor control, the cardiovascular control, the pain modulation, and sleep and consequences, and habitation, and more. And we will discuss about function and the ends of this practice. But now we just know the new function of this. We have learned the second system of the transmission of afferent signals. The first one we study on the spinal cord practice, and we have the special tracts, and it is the first activating system. So this conductive function of the spinal cord tracts. But this reticular formation is the second activating system, and it will have special name, reticular activating system, RAS. So the first one, it is just conductive tracts of the white matter, or that conduct signals quickly but cannot decide on their modulation. But the ARAS ascending reticular activating system is a network represented by neurons, and they are able to make the decision. Also, the signals transmission that is lower due to the large number of synapses. And this system transmits afferent signals to the brain. And you see this part of the reticular formation inside the brain. So we have a lot of different signals from the cortex, for the cerebellum, thalamus, and all these signals can move into this nucleus of reticular formation. Do you see the optic, auditory, olfactory, and taste pathways, and even the touch from the head, from the skin of the face and all head. And what we have as afferents to reticular formation, we have this system transmits afferent signals to the brain and brain stem and tectoreticular tracts from the both sides of the body, and from the cerebellum, basal ganglia, and neocortex, and even limbic lobe. But we have the afferent and afferent side of this reticular formation. So from this nucleus of reticular formation, the signals can move to thalamus and to the red nucleus and substantia nigra, and in the cerebellum and the cortex, and more different centers in the brain. So it's the afferents from the reticular formation to the spinal cord. Don't forget about the special tracts, reticulospinal tracts. Do you remember? And we will discuss about this a little bit more. To the afferent connections are to the spinal cord, to the brain stem, and next one to the cerebellum and corpus stratum, and nuclei of reticular formation. We should know all nuclei, not all, because it's so much quantity, but we should know very important of them. Now let's look at the structure of the reticular formation. And the reticular formation is the set of interconnected nuclei that are located through the brain stem. It's not anatomically well defined because it includes neurons located in different parts of the brain and brain stem, and we will use these directions in the neuroanatomy, like posterior, caudal, ventral, lateral, and rostral. You know this part, it's like first part of the brain. And what we have in this? We have brain stem and reticular nuclei, which we divided to median column, blue one color, and two parts, medial column and lateral column green colored. You see cranial nerves and interneurons previously. So the middle column or median column has the Reticular, and we will start from this part of the brain. And using the example of the medulla oblongata, we can imagine the internal location, and they are divided into groups. As you can see, there are a lot of them, and we have a lot of work, of course, and depend on the special neurotransmitters. All nuclear group has a special letter. For example, group A, group B, C, and whole energy group. You see here, and here we see the table with the nucleus of reticular formation. It depends on the neurotransmitter, and here we see the nucleus, so we have a lot of work with this nucleus. But they are very important for the doctor. Of course, we don't describe all of them, but the most. And we will start from the central group. As you see on this picture, we have the serotoninergic nucleus, and let's discuss this nucleus. So let's start from the serotoninergic nucleus, and we will remind the function of the serotonin, and leave a link. I leave a link to this neurotransmitter to the description of this video. Especially the central roles controls the appetite, sleep, mood, and even pain and vomiting. And here we see the special median group of nuclei of reticular formation position in the middle line, and collectively call it all this nuclei Reticular. And what this nuclei produce the serotonin neurotransmitter, and even this photo has special groups of this nuclei. As you see, the nuclei is the first, the second, and the third group, and this one first, the second, and the third group of this nuclei, especially the dorsal rostral nucleus, which this group, and as you see, three areas of this nucleus, they belong to the different anatomical structures of the brainstem, and they were given numbers. They belong to different structures of the brain. The first group of the nucleus of the medulla oblongata, the second the nucleus of the pons, and the third group the nucleus of the midbrain. And this part of median nucleus, also known as the nucleus medianus or superior central nucleus, is a brain region composed of polygonal neurons which exist rostral to the nucleus pontis, and this projects intensively to the hippocampus, which is known to be essential to the formation of long-term memory. It's also been found to play a role in anxiety and depression, and the dorsal nucleus is the largest serotoninergic nucleus in the central nervous system at all, and provides a substantial proportion of the serotonin innervation of the forebrain. And here we see this three main functions of this dorsal nucleus. It is morphine withdrawal, role in narcolepsy and even in depression, as we see, and below you see an example of the muscle relaxant. In veterinary medicine, we often use muscle relaxation before anesthesia. Soon you will study surgery and pharmacology, and there you will get more details and information about the mechanism of action of this muscle relaxant. Here we see this function in a centrally acting muscle relaxant. In this nuclei we produce a special serotonergic receptors. We have these receptors, and it's very important for anesthesia. So next slide is the median column, the next part of the nucleus from the reticular formation, and Gantt cells nuclei are involved in motor coordination. And why this name? Because of special shape of the cells and position lateral to the nuclei of median column. This is collectively made up to large cells mainly, and the special reticular nucleus, and we will start from the first one, but in this slide it is the second, but we start from this. And previously we should know what kind of neurotransmitter is produced by these cells. It is mostly cholinergic nuclei and glutamatergic nuclei. Here we see this in red colored shapes. And this slide shows that all these nuclei cholinergic or glutamatergic. So here we have two main groups of nucleus: cholinergic, pedunculopontine nucleus, and pontine tegmental reticular nucleus. Always this nucleus has some names, so we have these black colored names. But in our table we have some names which have synonyms. So here we see the location of this nuclei more clearly, and the function. Here we see this parts of this brainstem and reticular formation, and here within neurotransmitter which can produce these cells, and where these waves can move signals previously on the cortex. And here we see next one, the medial column and gigantocellular nucleus. So this part of the reticular formation, the gigantocellular reticular nucleus, is the subregion of the medullary reticular formation, and within this transmitter glutamatergic nucleus. So the glutamate, it's a neurotransmitter of this area. So I will leave the links about these neurotransmitters, but as usual you can find in this description to this video. And here we see this part of this nuclei, and even better location we will see later. But the next one is the third group of the nuclei, which can produce the same neurotransmitters, and this cuneiform nucleus may be involved in the regulation of the skeletal muscle tone, but this function we will discuss later. And it's not only one point, and here on the next slide we will see this. As you see, it is a very recent study of this nuclei, and another one that shows the function of this nuclei. And here we see this part of the brain. Of course it is a human's brain, and this part of this nuclei. Here we see this very interesting MRT photo. And what we have in this nucleus is glutamatergic neurons with this part of the region of reticular formation, the primary phenotype for initiation of control locomotion. And glutamatergic, these neurons may contribute to the initiation of the low-speed locomotion. And the next one column of the reticular formation, it is two lateral columns and position lateral to the nucleus of medial column, and collectively made up to small cells mainly. And these parvocellular cells control mainly the visceral functions of the organs and extension from the medulla to midbrain. And here we see this locus, not all, but most of them. You see from the different parts of the this brainstem we see. And so we have, there are many nucleus, many of them are norepinephrinergic nuclei. So this nuclei produce norepinephrine or epinephrine in the central nervous system. Here we see in this table noradrenergic. Sometimes we have this name, norepinephrine, noradrenergic nuclei. And here we know this first locus coeruleus. We discussed this nuclei on the previous practical, and a little bit about function. This nuclei controls the cardiac centers, respiratory centers, vasomotor centers, salivation, and of course chemoreceptors neurons. And here we see the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata, and here we see a lot of nucleus in different parts of the brainstem and brain. And even more on this slide, it is very interesting. This nucleus has the letters too, like in the previous slides, with the first median part of Refi nucleus. Functionally, all these nucleus are very important as they control vital function. And here we see the centers and description of these centers, but I just don't stop on these slides. These several slides describe the location of this nucleus and the transmitters of them, and we will consider everything but focus on the most important function. What could be more important than breathing and heart beating? And there we see the parabronchial complex, very important part of the reticular formation. In the human brain, the parabronchial area, also known as the parabronchial complex and parabronchial nucleus, is a horsehog-shaped strip and gray matter, and a lot of different nucleus located. It is located in the junction of the midbrain and pons in the lateral reticular formation, rostral to the parvocellular reticular nucleus near the superior cerebral peduncle. And here we see the location of these parts, and the respiratory centers. At first we will discuss about respiratory center, are divided into four major groups: medulla and pons groups. And here we see this dorsal respiratory group and ventral respiratory group of nucleus, and pneumotoxic centers and apneustic centers, so control the apnoea. And in inspiratory center, dorsal respiratory group and with location and nucleus this group, and expiratory center, ventral respiratory group with location, nucleus. It's not very big, about 5 millimeters for humans, so it's very important part. So here we see the parts of the brain and pons, medulla oblongata, and the part of spinal cord. Do you remember this pathway which controls the muscle contraction on the chest and which helps to move the volume of the cranial part of the body, and ventral pneumotaxis center, and even more. Here we see the next one, description of this center, next part, and here in the different rostral, caudal, and some of them this expiratory, inspiratory neurons. And very important to control the breath. Breath control is very complex reflex. We will consider this issue in more details in the chapter about respiratory system. And breath control is very complex, including a coordination, and it can be voluntary and involuntary. Includes these reflexes. The reticular formation is involved everywhere, and voluntary and involuntary control of the breathing is a part controlled by the coordination of the reflex of cerebral cortex. It is the higher brain center of control of breathing, and the rest on voluntary as a response to the irritation of the different receptors, especially in a vessels system, but in a muscles too. After some work of muscle contraction, and central chemoreceptors, as you see, can be in a brainstem, in a hypothalamus, and from the cerebellum. And if the level of the oxygen will be less than normal, we start to breathe more deep, and if the concentration of CO2 will be more, so we start to do the same. And peripheral chemoreceptors in a special area of aortic bodies, its name, and carotid bodies in the special place of arteria carotis, and we will discuss about these areas in the next module when we will study the cardiovascular system. And the breath can be controls the pain, even the pain signals and muscle signals, and all these signals move to the reticular formation and then through the thalamic area in a special area of the cortex. It's voluntary control of the breathing. So the breathing control through the reticular formation can be voluntary and involuntary. So next one slide. We know about nerve centers of reticular formation and start to study of function of reticular formation, and we have the ascending part of reticular formation. Ascending reticular activating system brings sensory messages from the reticular formation to the brain cortex, and vice versa. The activating system is the regulator of information, for example respiration rate and cough response, cardiac rhythm, and chewing. And for example we have the descending reticular formation, like here we see that brings messages to and from the motor neurons of the spinal cord and the reticulospinal tracts. These tracts are the major descending pathway from the reticular formation and act on many levels of the spinal cord to coordinate movements and autonomic function for autonomic nerve system. And the reticulospinal tracts project to spinal cord motor neurons and help to modulate tone, balance, posture and even coordination of the body movements with the assistance of the sensory stimulus such as visual, audio stimulus and vestibular stimulus from the cerebellum. And it also has two parts, inhibitory area and excitatory area, and again to stop some signals. And here we see the off function, and we will move and use this slide, and we will start the first role of reticular formation, its role in sleep and wakefulness, and this you see this function of the brain, of the reticular formation of the brain, strong facilitatory drive to the central nerves, input through the tegmental area, visual auditory tracts, and in an experiment we see this. I hope you remember these scientists from the first slides of this practical, Maruzzi and Mahon, were the first to study the neural components that regulate sleep and wakefulness mechanism of the brain. These physiologists have hypothesized that some structures deep in the brain control the mental insomnia, and all the experiments was with the cats. But it's not the first experiments with animals and with reticular formation. We have the Bremer's theory of the sleep, and it's this theory of the Bremer considered that sleep occurs when there is a little sensory input to the forebrain. Just after that the animals start to sleep. But some years later, these two scientists have a new theory. You see active wave, reticular activating system theory of the sleep, and concluded that the wakefulness producing area has located in the reticular formation between the levels of the special part of the brain stem. And after that we have this theory of the sleep, and has this slide. The RES also acts as a filter of damped, repetitive, familiar or weak signals. It's estimated that 99% of the all sensory stimulus is even just the stimulus can to move in the cortex. The RES synapses will all major ascending sensory tracts and arousal of the cerebellum. The RES function in arousal from sleep, it can be affected by general anesthesia, alcohol, and even special drugs. Head trauma can also lead to loss of the consequences, and the animal can be unconscious, and the activity of the RES is inhibited by sleep centers in the hypothalamus and other neural regions, and damage of these parts just can be result in a coma. So we have the next one function. It is responsible for the alerting response to emotion and to the muscular work, and even controls the muscle tone. And here we see the descending reticular formation part, and the reticular formation also has a motor component. Some of its motor nuclei project to motor neurons in the spinal cord, and via the reticulospinal tracts use these tracts of white matter, and they help control the skeletal muscle during movements and just limbs movements. And here we see the part of this reticular formation which controls the muscle tone, and gives the signal to the motor center in the cortex. And do you remember this part of the muscle? Muscle spindle. Let's look more. It is very important part. It is the gamma motor neurons of the muscle spindle. We discussed this part of the muscle when we studied the muscle. In general, we have the two parts of these fibers: gamma dynamic fibers and static fibers. And these fibers, I hope you remember how the muscle spindle work and how it built. And here we see the two types. It's just two types of these fibers, and I leave these links if you don't remember how it works. And here we see the tracts for move these signals from this muscle spindle to the cortex. And it's a very important signal transmission points, the tracts, and these signals controls the static and just posture of the body and the dynamics of the body or movement of the body. And of course, movement and posture cannot be controlled without the vestibular apparatus. Vestibular part, it's mostly located in the cerebellum. Here we see the way of the transmission of the vestibular signals from the vestibular nucleus of the cerebellum to the reticular formation. Here we see the part of inhibitory and facilitated area, and just we can to stop some signals here. And even more, we here see these parts of the brain and selectively controls the excitatory signals to the different anti-gravity muscles to maintain equilibrium and response to signals from the vestibular apparatus. In general, we have this that all muscles in the body always in a special activation, in a special tense, normally always in a tense. And these tense are controlled of reticular formation. And here we see the picture, this draw we saw when we discussed about the damage of the medulla oblongata and midbrain. It shows how important it is to preserve signals transmission and control pathways, and it can be just after damage can be rigidity, extensor rigidity, or posture in both upper and lower limbs. And next one, function, influence endocrine secretion. And here we see the endocrine control through the hypothalamus, of course. It is a special area, hypothalamo-hypophyseal system. And stress. The reticular formation take part in stress, and you see they stimulate the reticular formation, which in turn can activate hypothalamus through the central nervous system. So in increase realize of corticotropin realizing factor, which while acting on the anterior pituitary realize special hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and this increase cortisol secretion. Cortisol in produce the adrenaline and noradrenaline, and there is increased secretion of the catecholamine. It's all has a name, catecholamine. And even gastric hydrochloric acid secretion, and stimulates steroid stimulating hormone secretion through the hypothalamus. Here we see this area, and this realize and gonadotropins. And one more function, it is a role in visceral function, and like a special area, it is a cardiac rhythm control. You know, the part of the our nerve system. It is a part of autonomic nerve system and the reticular function, and can control the visceral function like gastric secretion, motility of the intestine, heart rate control, and respiration, as you know, and salivation and vomiting, and influenced by various centers located in the reticular formation of the medulla, and even can control the vasomotor center and cardio respiratory center. This control can be realized by the autonomic nerve system, so sympathetic and parasympathetic fibers. Do you remember sympathetic fibers activate the work of some visceral organs, not all, some of them, but for cardio, for heart, it is activation, and parasympathetic fibers can just depress the work of the heart. And the next function of the reticular formation influence on the area of our cortex and learning. Learning, of course, it's just activate the cerebral cortex and have part in formation of the memory, long-term memory, and selective attention. Just modulation of afferent signals, just in order not to overload the cerebral cortex with many signals from the periphery, and most of these signals are just inhibited, and it is a selective response is formed. And pain, of course, pain has a special place, and this, you see, the special part of the receptors, nanoceptors, give information to the spinal cord, and from the spinal cord in a reticular formation area. If the signal very new or very high level, so the signals move in a special area of the cortex. But sometimes we have the signal not so much and not effective, so we have just the reticular formation stops this signal, like not very important. So, paying attention, and pain has a special place, of course, in our body, and emotions are formed in response to the pain. Even, yes, we know we are finished this practice, and I want to remind you that the reticular formation is very important in understanding anesthesia, and subject of pharmacology and anesthesiology, and remind you the neurotransmitters, and soon you will be studying substances that block the transmission of signals, especially pain signals to the central nervous system, block synapses, and as a result you can inject the animal into the anesthesia state, and all these neurotransmitters work in the brain, especially in reticular formation, and just we use some drugs for general anesthesia, and just stop this synapses and stops the pain. So it is all for today. See you later, and bye bye.